For as long as I can remember, I've had what we call in the UK a stammer, but what is commonly known in America as a stutter. This is a speech disorder that affects my ability to say particular sounds and words. So on a particularly difficult word, I might find myself repeating certain sounds, or I might experience physical blocks, where the sound of a word gets stuck in my vocal cords and simply will not come out. Rather than helpfully, this often included my name. So if I were introducing myself to somebody, I'd find myself struggling to say Jonathan. Even more frustratingly, my parents, in the infinite wisdom of course, had also given me a double-barreled surname, made up of two fairly unconventional surnames in their own right. So I would have finally managed to say Jonathan, to now find myself struggling to say Bertulis-Fernandes. Then of course the person I'm speaking to wouldn't have heard me the first time. I'd have to start all over again. It's obviously incredibly frustrating to not be able to say the things that you want to say. To not be able to join in discussions with family or friends, or even answer questions in job interviews. To have people look at you as if you're an idiot, or indeed, as I experienced when I was younger, have other children laugh at you. I found my sheer lack of control over responses of other people terrifying, never quite knowing how they were going to react, and the constant fear that they would respond negatively towards me. The cumulative effects of these difficulties over time would be to leave myself with a deep sense of shame and broader social anxiety. This permeated every aspect of my life and embedded itself deeply within my psyche, impacting the ways in which I thought about and viewed everything. For me, therefore, my stutter had gained this dual component, this physical side, the overt struggle to actually get the words out in the first place, but also this covert, hidden side, this constant struggle and effort to disguise the reality of my situation and who I really was. For me, it was this covert side I found most difficult. I lived in constant fear that somebody would discover the truth about me, that I had the stutter and wasn't normal like everybody else. So as a result, I do what I could to control situations, to try and keep the amount of speech down to a bare minimum. So for instance, a word like children, I hated the ch sound. So if I had to use that word, I found an alternative like kid, or perhaps, rather oddly on one occasion, offspring. I was studying international relations and social anthropology, but of course couldn't say either of these, so these became I on Anthro. And as I've already said, I couldn't say my name. So if I had to sort of call someone up, I would use an alternative name. So I was Paul Smith to my hairdressers, which I never quite pulled off, by the way. I'd often use so many different names with restaurants. By the time I got there, I'd forgotten which one I'd used in the first place. My life, therefore, had become this constant exercise in calculation, based firmly around the principle of the least worst. So what was the least worst scenario I could craft? These scenarios containing the least chance of my being forced to speak, and thus, perhaps risk having my stutter discovered. The French existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre spoke of the idea of the gaze, or the look, the ways in which it's through our interactions with other people we become conscious of the ways in which we exist as things or objects within this exogenous perception of other people. What we are, therefore, is a part projection of how we are perceived, formed within this gaze of other people. 18 months ago, I realized that this part projection of myself that others saw when they looked at me was founded on a falsehood. My relationship with family and friends, in the same way that I'd use fake names on the telephone, was founded on false assumptions regarding who I was. I realized that if I were to ever truly be myself, I had to address the central disconnect in my existence. And I realized I had to do this by confronting my fears around speaking. So I embarked on this journey to confront my fears around speech. I went from actively eschewing speaking situations to seeking them out. I talked to people on buses and on my way to lectures, engaging people in conversations as situations which I once would have just sat in a corner and listened to music on my own. I would seek people out at social gatherings, and I committed to making all phone calls myself, no longer relying on my family or girlfriend whenever I could. I was open about having a stutter, and for the first time in my life, I gave myself permission to go out and actively and openly stutter in front of other people. This experience has been revelatory and liberating for me in many different ways. To accept where the limits of my individual control are is to ultimately accept myself as I am. But by far the biggest revelation was discovering the ways in which our fears of not being in control hold not just me, but also everyone else I know back. We live in a society which privileges the identification, management, and mitigation of risk above all else. Our modern society, with its roots in the Enlightenment, places an emphasis on calculability and the apprehension of the obscure and abstract. Growing up in London, every day on my way to school, there'd be a sign telling me, informing me of the status of train services on the London Underground, with different categories of minor or major delays based on the likely calculated impact to my journey. Similarly, I spent the summer interning in the British government department, and every day as I walked into the entrance atrium, again, a sign would tell me what terror threat level category we were at. All of these efforts at calculation are demonstrative of our desire to exert control. We enumerate and categorize everything with the aim of giving ourselves a sense of control of that which we cannot ever hope to grasp. We're scared that in this ever-expanding ether, we are really so very small. And we find this element of the sheer uncontrollability of life terrifying. But I would argue that an element of loss of control is ultimately inherent and fundamental to the human condition, and thus our desire to exert control betray an inherent fear of life itself. So in response to these fears, we seek to construct these situations in which we feel we're in control and therefore comfortable. We rarefy this control, and we use our corresponding level of comfort as a key criterion in decision-making. But I would argue that whilst this is understandable, it's problematic. I would argue that the illusion of control, and it is an illusion, ultimately gets in the way of us truly experiencing life. As a person who stutters, I've had to force myself to enter these spaces in which I'm not in control, not able to dictate the speaking situations I will encounter, or indeed the reactions of the people I'll be speaking to. Through doing this, my fears of speaking, of social situations, and perhaps fundamentally of judgment were all reduced. Perhaps most importantly, I also find myself enjoying these experiences a whole lot more. For want of a better word, my lack of control in this space is fun, it's electric, and I find myself taking joy in the beauty of the unexpected and the uncontrollable. This experience of life itself is not something to be domesticated or contained. It's not something into which you should step for a brief period of time before retreating back to the safety and confines of your protective bubble. The assural of control as a concept is fairly in vogue currently, and it's quite common to hear people talk about how important it is to push out your comfort zones, and how important it is to make yourself do these things that you don't want to do. For me, however, it's far more about destroying completely your comfort zones, removing completely this artificial barrier, standing between yourself and a full spectrum of life's experiences. I like to think of ways I can try to break this down. So every day I attempt to chip away at this thin stone wall. I set myself goals of at least 10 things a day that I do not feel fully comfortable doing. The key for me is to keep this quantifiable, so I carry around this clicker counter with me at all times, to keep a record number of times I do this. So for instance, let's say I'm out at a doctor's office, and I go up and I make small talk with somebody, with their consent of course, and that's a click. You know, say that I'm in a lecture hall in front of what feels like hundreds of people, sort of like right now, by the way, and I stand up and I ask the person speaking a question. That's another click. That's my ultimate fear, something which would have kept me cowering back in the past. And that's a formal social situation. And I go up and I introduce myself to multiple people. That's another click. I graduated last year with a degree in social anthropology. And central to any anthropologist is the ability to decenter and remove yourself completely from the social and ontological structures within which you exist. It's only through removing yourself from the familiar ways of seeing things that you can truly attempt to understand the ways in which different groups conceptualize and understand their way of being. This is famously summed up in the mantra of making the familiar strange and the strange familiar. Through doing this over time, you gradually realize that there's nothing fundamentally different between the ways in which you see something and the ways in which somebody on the other side of the world sees them. Similarly, through chipping away at your comfort zone, you gradually realize that there's nothing fundamentally separating these familiar situations which you are comfortable and those unfamiliar situations which you aren't, beyond, of course, this thin stone wall which you yourself have created. Everyone's comfort zone or a thin stone wall is obviously different. And what's worth a click for me will not be worth a click for all of you. What we all do share, though, is the ways in which our fears of not being in control hold us back from truly experiencing life. I strongly encourage you all to start chipping away at your own thin stone wall. Take some time to think about what makes you most uncomfortable, your internal anxiety and your deepest fears, and set yourself tangible goals to start to break these down. And slowly, you'll find yourself breaking through. To return to Sartre, what we are is a part projection of how we are perceived. Life is inherently malleable, but in order for us to truly reorientate the ways in which we experience our lives, we must be willing to accept loss of control. I strongly believe that most exciting moments of life, these extraordinary and serendipitous moments within the otherwise humdrum every day, occur in the space outside individuals' comfort zones. There's an inherent beauty in the unexpected and the uncontrollable, but we insulate ourselves from it every single day. By giving this talk to you all, I've added another click to my total for the day, and I've worked to chip away another piece of my comfort zone. I strongly encourage you all to start chipping away yours. Thank you so much.